an addict, and my drug of choice was alcohol. And people sometimes ask me, why don't you just call yourself an alcoholic? In our recovery house right now, we have one who is addicted to opiates, two who are addicted to alcohol, one who is addicted to cocaine, and we have a gambler. We're all in addiction recovery. And the root cause of addiction is very simple. So that's what we try to do in our sober house, is to get at the reasons why you started using in the first place. And that sometimes requires you to dig back into your history quite a ways. I became, after 27 years of struggling to find sobriety, in 1997 I finally landed on my feet and have been sober since then. So some 22 years have gone by. During that time I got very active. I got very active in the 12-step program and service work. And then I got more into community service work. And that happened because when we did meetings at, for example, the Wesley Center, which is a drop-in center, I got connected with a lot of the homeless people. And I saw them leave for a while and end up back at the shelters. They would leave again and they would end up back at the shelters. I said, what's going on? Like, you know, you got out of here once and you're back again. They said, well, they sent me to a place where the dealer lived next door to me. Like, yeah. You know, so where is a safe place that I can go? And, you know, through my connections with, I worked at St. Leonard's in Hamilton at the time, which is a halfway house for federal parolees. So I became familiar with their needs as well. Part of my job was doing assessment of needs, and trying to provide the community services or services that they needed to fit their particular situation. And it's not unlike that in addiction recovery. You know, everybody has similar and yet perhaps different needs. And so we try to do that and try to fit their needs to what resources are available in the community. You know, when Rebecca asked me to speak, I said, how long do you want me to talk for? She said, 10 minutes. And I said, well, gee, it takes me that long sometimes to remember what I wanted to say. So I brought some notes, just in case I had a lapse. But, so my connection to the homelessness began in that way, in that I connected with them through the service work I was doing. Now, addiction doesn't necessarily cause homelessness, and homelessness doesn't necessarily cause addiction. There's only a percentage of the homeless sector that actually are addicts or alcoholics. So when we look at that sector, it's really important for them when they leave that scene and attempt recovery that they be in a safe environment. Now, I experienced that in my own struggle in early recovery. I moved into a boarding house, 4 rooms upstairs on the second floor of the house, and the other 3 guys were alcoholics. And here I'm trying to abstain from alcohol, right? So, and even now that I'm in I've got a solid recovery now, so it doesn't bother me now. But on my floor, the 12th floor of a big apartment building, a seniors building in Hamilton, I have 3 alcoholics and 1 drug addict on my floor, and I can hear the activity. You know, now that in early recovery, that would have been a trigger for me for sure. And that's what my experience was. I had to sometimes leave and sleep in my truck because of the activities that were going on. I just felt safer there. Mm-hmm. And when I see people back at the shelter, they said, you know what, I'm safer here than I was where they put me, right? So housing is only a part, putting a roof over somebody's head is only a part of the solution. Unless the supports and service are in place to help them move forward in life, then they're not going to be successful. Now some people amaze me with their resilience, that they can do it on their own, right? In spite of circumstances, they just have that natural ability and resilience to move through it and find recovery very quickly. Others struggle like I did. Like I say, it took me 27 years to finally get it and to be free of that burden of addiction. Over the course of that time, I of course lost everything. I was on my own, and it just seemed like an impossible chore. I went to a treatment center, which opened up my eyes to the things that I really needed to do. So the lack of safe housing is a huge problem when it comes to addiction recovery. You know, the odd thing too is in shelters, a lot of them are living in competing realities. There are some people who live in the shelter at night, but they go to work in the morning. You know, they go to work either full-time or part-time, but they don't have a safe place to stay, right? Same with the people that I see coming in and out of detox. They leave detox, they leave treatment centers to go where? Back to their using environments, right? And it's really hard to stay sober that way. Providing housing is not really the ultimate solution unless there's support services in place. And organizations like Indwell are doing a marvelous job of supplying supports before the resident actually moves in. The supports are already there, right? So they're doing an awesome job in that. And they're evolving, they're developing programs to fit the needs of their clients. And the supports are already there when the person arrives. That doesn't happen with addiction services. In Hamilton, we have a treatment program called Wayside Treatment Center. They have 6 recovery houses, but it's only for their clients. So you have to go through their program to qualify for their housing. And that means that the rest of the community gets left out of the picture. Not everybody can go to that treatment center. And there are people that leave Hamilton to go to treatment centers, like Stonehenge and Guelph is a super facility. It's a therapeutic community, not a 12-step community. And there's a lot of people that need that type of treatment in order to succeed in recovery. So when they leave there, where do they go? I have a fellow now who, in the house, he just arrived in January, who went through Stonehenge, didn't have a place to go. He was couch surfing. We call that the hidden homeless. You know, they're not on the street, so they're not in a home, right? And even our place is transitional housing. It's not really a home, but they're in a supportive community where they understand each other. And that's really important in addiction recovery, that you're in an environment where people will understand you and have been where you're at, right? And they support each other. It's fascinating what happens in that environment. Excuse me, I get a dry throat when I'm talking. So, connecting people with resources is one of the things that we're able to do. Okay. And I'm fortunate that I had that job at St. Leonard because I learned where all the resources were. So I'm able to tap people into what their needs are. And I have a fellow in the house right now, he's 62. He's had various periods of homelessness and living in shelters. And you'd think, man, like, when's this guy going to get it? You know, I was 54 when I went into treatment, you know, so it's never too late. But because of the emotional struggles he has, he's offered and volunteered to go to Stonehenge. It was suggested to him. But he's going to go to Stonehenge where he's going to get some therapeutic counseling. And I'm sure he'll come out much more aware of his condition than when he went in. Right now, and I can recall that feeling, you know, I don't know why I drank. You know, I don't know why I picked up. I just found myself in the bar, you know, and people say that's crap, you know. But, you know, that actually happens. You know, you just don't know why you keep on drinking when you know what's gonna happen. Did you have a question?
Oh, no, just 5 minutes.
Oh, okay. So the whole concept of safe and sober housing, it's commonly called sober housing. I call it addiction recovery housing in general. In Hamilton, I'm the only private house, and I've been advocating for more and more sober housing for the last 12 years. I've had the sober house for 12 years. I lived there for 10 years myself, just to make sure I had hands on, and but you know what I found is if you empower people to do the right thing, they do the right thing. So it's a democratically run process. You know, they all have a say. We're all 1/5 of the house, right? And they all have a say. And one of the big things to overcome is social interaction. You know, addicts are not very good at that in the beginning. They have to learn how to communicate. And especially with guys that want to muscle each other out, right? And and so there's that thing that happens where, what'd you say that for? You know, instead of saying what you said, this is how it makes me feel, right? So you gotta kind of condition them to communicate in a different way. And it's surprising to see what happens as they evolve in their communication skills. And a lot of that's very common. Also, the thing that's common with people who have gone through addiction is when they quit their drug of choice, they find they have depression and anxiety. Those are two very common companions to addiction, as well as other mental health issues. And of course, we have to try to tap into those mental health resources in order to overcome those things. You got to treat the whole person. You can't just stop your drug of choice without solving the other problems. Because you'll just, if all the reasons to use are still there, you're going to keep using, no matter what. So you have to eliminate those reasons. And that's where the real work comes in. I can remember being 54 years old at the treatment center and then telling me I had to do some inner child work. At 54? Like, I don't remember my childhood, you know, but I had to do a lot of digging. And I ended up doing some private counseling for a year. My recovery is really diversified. I tapped into the Buddhist community. I tapped into the Native community. I went to Alcoholics Anonymous. I went to Narcotics Anonymous. I went to Al-Anon, phenomenal program. I learned a lot about codependence there because that was another one of my issues. I was codependent. And I didn't even know that. And I didn't even think of that as another addiction. Codependency is an addiction. And so there's a lot of these things that there isn't one solution that works for everybody. But providing safe housing, and I just got word yesterday that we will have another house available right next door to the one we have now. So I'll have 5 more beds, and what I'm hoping to do is to convince, and I've been working on this for years now, housing providers to provide sober space within their existing housing structures. One thing I wanted to make clear, and it's not something that's referred to, but the Human Rights Code, Ontario Human Rights Code, the policy on human rights and rental housing provides in-depth guidance on accommodating the needs of people with disabilities and other code-protected groups in employment, housing, and other areas. And addiction is a code disability. But there's very few organizations which recognize addiction as a disability. They think it's just a bad habit. You know, we don't think of it as an illness, as a sickness, as a disease. And so accommodation is not provided. But the Human Rights Code says we do have a right to it. We do have a right to live in safe, and I try to get them to use the word appropriate housing. Don't just put a roof over my head. Give me an appropriate place to stay. So I think the word appropriate has to be inserted in there. I think that the, housing providers are kind of scared to do that, but, because they would have to clear out a whole floor, you know, but in my building, which is a large building, 17 floors, in my building, they've got about 40 empty units right now. They could easily consolidate those spaces into one floor and have that as a recovery, no alcohol or drugs allowed floor, right? And establish a community room where addicts can associate with each other, because they don't feel comfortable discussing their addiction issues with somebody that doesn't understand addictions, right? But somebody who's been there and who's of like mind and wanting recovery, the peer support is tremendous, it's dynamic. So I think that's all I'm going to be allowed to say.
I'm sorry.
They're going to cut me off, but I'll be glad to answer any questions later if you have any.
Is there equivalent housing for women?
Not in Hamilton right now. We were hoping to have something available. We had put in an offer on 3 houses that was turned down, so now we're going to go about it one house at a time.
That house that you just got, was that from the support of which government, the house that you?
We're self-supporting.
So, how did you?
Our landlord,
Oh, nice.
present landlord bought the house
Yeah,
next door.
and do we have anything like that in Brantford?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, so.
But if anybody's willing to buy a house, John's happy to help you set it up.
We'll fill it.
Yeah, so we
I just found out yesterday we got the second house and it's already full.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Thank you.